Good evening, all, and welcome to the very first Cosmic Banter video episode. That's right, you can now watch along as well as listen. I'm super pumped for tonight's episode. We're interviewing Heather. Now, Heather is an energy healing practitioner who I met while I was hanging out on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. And Heather's had a lifetime of contact with the spirit realm, as well as what she refers to as star beings. Yes, you heard that right. But here's the real kicker. She drops an exclusive bombshell story, at least in my opinion, of her parents' UFO sighting in the 1980s. And despite Heather stating that multiple other town folks saw the craft, with one even calling up the local radio station, I still couldn't find any historical reporting of this incident online. So I guess in a way, Ralphie, what do you reckon? Cosmic Banter might just get the scoop on this one. Yeah, look, talking with Heather was super soothing, and you could really feel the calm energy in the room, and I think that translated over the recording itself. So hopefully you pick up on that, and hopefully you enjoy this. A couple of housekeeping, and I'll get straight to it, I promise. Don't forget to dive into the show notes where you can find the timestamps in case you want to, jump ahead or re-listen to any other key moments. And a heads up as well, this recording, well, it was a bit of a wild ride audio-wise. Honestly, it's a miracle it's listenable. Definitely some season 0 growing pains for sure. You'll also notice some draft artwork in the background, and our names were hovering over as the Zoom thumbnails. But yeah, it is what it is. Zoom also didn't record in 4K, so the video quality, that's also a bit of a work in progress. But I've done the best that I can to make sure it's worth your time. And I mean, on that note, if you are enjoying the show and you are keen to see the Cosmic Banter podcast progress and be successful with better audio quality and production quality, then consider donating by visiting the donation link in the show notes below. Yeah, look, any support goes a long way towards giving a bit better listening experience, and that's what you guys want, right? Anyway, with that being said, this is the Cosmic Banter Podcast, Season 0, Episode 4, and the title is The 1980 UFO Landing in Moree, New South Wales. Enjoy. Heather, thanks so much for joining me on the Cosmic Banter Podcast. How are you?
Oh, hi, Steve. I'm very well, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we met in Queensland. I'm back in New Zealand now. And yeah, I think you've had an interesting life, haven't you?
Yes, I have. And I've moved around a fair bit as well, and I haven't had much time in New Zealand, but I've been there twice. So
yeah,
hope you're happy, settled there. And I'm living up in the hinterland of the Sunshine Coast in southeast Queensland in Australia, in the mountains, and we're on like a volcanic ridge here. It's called the Blackall Ranges.
Yep.
That's my latest place that I've settled. Yeah,
that's where I first met you, and it was what I've forgotten the name of the township.
Oh, Mullaney, yeah.
Mullaney. Oh, it was beautiful. It was sort of this just magical sort of up in the rainforest, and there was something special about it. After I saw you, I went to the there's that sort of piece of forest. There's a reserve.
American.
That one.
Very
that one.
Beautiful. Over the mountains there.
Yeah. Couldn't see them. It was raining, but yeah.
The Glasshouse Mountains are a really important sacred site for a lot of places, not just us, like by a couple of the indigenous country that of Yinnabarra, and which is spelt with a J and pronounced without the J, Yinnabarra, and Kabi Kabi. So I live on Kabi Kabi and Yinnabarra country here, or Yinnabarra country. And we overlook the Glasshouse Mountains, which are associated to the Pleiades and the Seven Sisters. In much of the original people's stories encompass the Seven Sisters wherever they live in this country or their own countries. And this particular place is meant to be aligned with the Seven Sisters very well. So we have lots of beautiful energy coming down from the sky as well here. Yeah, high up, it's great.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful, beautiful area. So I'll next time. Well, I intend on heading back to Australia at some point, and at some point I'll be back up in Maloney. So, shall we get into it, because you've got a couple of I'm sure you've got hundreds of stories that you could share, but you've narrowed it down to a couple, I understand, that you'd like to share today.
Yes, I know you and I have talked a little bit, and I'm not sure which stories I shared with you, but I've just let those stories come through this morning, the ones that felt like they needed to be told.
And
I think my life has been, my life has included the stars since as long as I can remember. My father used to take us, I had 4 sisters, and we go out on the front balcony of our house. We lived out in the bush, like thousands of acres and no neighbours. And the stars in those days were so bright in the sky. Things have changed. The lights across the earth now has sort of dimmed the sky a little bit, but it's still, you can still get beautiful views out in the bush. And Dad used to point out some of the stars to us. So, I was always fascinated with the stars, and the moon and the sun and what happened up above us. I didn't really understand much about it from an astronomy perspective. Dad did attempt to teach us, but I just felt an energetic pull towards them, and I was able to see beings that other people couldn't see. I didn't actually see star beings when I was young, but I saw my guardian angel. I had a spirit sister who used to hang out with me. So I was a sensitive little girl who had insight, into other worlds. And so that was handy. And
yeah, I bet it is.
Yeah, and I developed that's, I guess, gift over the years. And now I'm able to move in and out of other worlds. And that's been really useful. So my experience with the star beings has been in a physical way, and that I've only had one encounter personally myself, but I've had quite a few clients who've had encounters. And I've been to South Africa in 2007 and studied with a shaman there for a short time with other people, and he told us a lot about the star beings. I've also had, I've researched, I've read books. My mother and father both had an experience themselves of the crime, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. I'll tell you the big story of that. So I grew up knowing that there were other life forms in other worlds that the average person isn't really aware of, and is almost a lot of people are becoming aware of. Yeah, so I've been interested in cosmic beings, and I call them star beings, for a long time. And they've been part of my work, very much part of what I do now as an energetic healing practitioner and trainer, teacher. And also I do quite a bit of gridding out on the land around the place to help them bring some of their energies down here to help us. So a go-between, if you like, between the worlds, yeah.
Before you start, yeah, that's amazing. Before you sort of start those stories, you mentioned, I don't know if this is one of the stories that you go into mention already, but when you were younger, you had an encounter with your angel guardian angels. Is that right? Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I could see my guardian angel. My mother would say a prayer each night with us, and we would pray to the guardian angel to keep us safe through the night. And I used to lie in bed and have a little chat to my guardian angel. So I wouldn't have a big chat. It would just be like noticing my guardian angel. It was a big I was never quite sure whether my angel was a man or a woman. It was like very feminine, kind of masculine looking mix, I guess. And I later came to think of the angel being Archangel Gabriel, seemed to be that angel. But I didn't really ask for a name. I just felt the presence, and I could actually physically see a large being with wings and
really
handing over me. Yeah. And it was always just as I was going to sleep. It wasn't like I'd sit up and have a conversation. It was just a sense of there being a being, but also being able to see someone there. And then I had...
Sorry, I was just going to ask, was this with your eyes closed or even...
Probably.
Mm-hmm.
But I could see my guardian angel with my eyes open, but I was sleepy. I was young.
Mm.
And, you get kind of... You dream, you go into other worlds so easily. You're never sure if you're awake or you're asleep at that point. So it was never during the day. I didn't have that sense of seeing my angel during the day, although I did dissociate to the angels a little bit. Occasionally I'd drift off in my head, and feel like I was in another world. And I had a little sister, or a sister the same age as me, who didn't come through. So I could see her with my eyes open. I spent a lot of time talking to her. And no one else could see her in the family. And they all just knew I had this, you hear of it all the time, how she'll have these companions. And she was my little friend. She didn't have wings, but she used to wear a bit like a fairy dress, I remember, and like a little pink tutu type of thing. And she'd hang out with me a lot at night, so we'd talk through the window. She never came in the house. She used to talk to me outside Mum and Dad's window. And so she was with me for quite a few years. And eventually that kind of psychic awareness drifted away and didn't. It was in my late 20s, which is also very common among children, when they're supported and they're not questioned, when they're allowed to have these imaginary friends. They'll stay in that world, but eventually this world here that you and I are in, this three-dimensional world, overtakes our brain, doesn't have enough exercise to keep that window open to those other worlds. And so our brain will shut that down. It doesn't become familiar enough for it to concentrate on that. I think that's somehow, from the studies I've done, it seems like you can open up to other worlds through meditation, mindful meditation, creative visualization, hypnosis. There's ways to access those worlds as you grow older and as you're an adult. And that's how I reactivated my connection with those worlds, was through daily meditation. And I started to see spirits again and communicate with them. So, some of them were probably star beings. I don't really know. But most of them were, the spirits that I saw were lost souls. So they were drifting in between worlds, and they still take a human form, but they'd be lost trying to find their way to the light. And so
Is that quite distressing for you to experience, especially in the earlier days?
It didn't happen like every day. It was just every and it made me curious, really. And so I eventually drifted more towards those worlds, and I was guided by those beings of light. So it's not like you're just left on your own with some, there are guides, there are people who show you the way. And I eventually came to meet my star family guides, who started to whisper to me and show me when I was doing healings ways that I could, they would help me, and they still do. Yeah. So they only had one rule, and that was that I had to tell the people I was working with what I was doing. I couldn't just do it quietly. And I've always been like that anyway. As a practitioner, people come to me, I don't stand there and do all that blah, blah, blah stuff. It's an interactive process. It's something that I guide people through and show them and tell them what I'm doing so they're not frightened or they don't feel like they've been left out of the transformation, the journey. I love people to be really conscious with me that they can access other worlds and creations and journeys like I have. Yeah.
That's wonderful. What's your definition of, because I've heard you use that before, obviously, star beings or star family, which makes sense. Would that be just to the spiritual layman, so to speak, would a good description be like extraterrestrials, but ones whom you're related to in another lifetime, or how would you describe that?
I think that, they're two different things. Star being is a general name. I didn't always use that name. Like most people, I called those extraterrestrial beings either extraterrestrial beings or aliens, which is a common name. And it's very sad because alien suggests something that is not part of you, or it belongs to another existence, but it's a bit steeper than that. Like, to me, it's not very nice. It's not a very nice name, calling people who are here to help us. It's like they consider us their family and their responsibility, as we're part of the whole universe and the cosmic, the celestial. They're celestial beings as we are celestial beings. We are also star beings. We belong to the universe. You and I are star beings. And when you call them aliens, it suggests that we're not part of the same creation. And I do think we are. It's just that we take different forms and we live in different homes and different planets. So when you start to embrace them more as relatives or part of, the whole of consciousness by giving them another name, then it all softens. And I think, you can still use the word alien when you don't really know who you're dealing with, I guess, because it's foreign to you.
Yeah, I was going to say that I suppose for most people, whether they're interested in the topic and believe in so-called aliens, or whether they don't, either way, they haven't connected with them. So alien seems like an appropriate name. They are an other, but it would make sense, especially once you've had a personal experience, which I'm keen for you to share, that you would refrain and call them, star beings instead. That makes a lot of sense. Do you want to maybe sharing one or two of those specific stories that you have?
Well, I was going to tell you how the name star beings came about.
Okay, sorry, yes.
Okay. Well, in 2007, I went on a journey to South Africa with a group of people mainly to meet a shaman called Credo Matawa, and he's since passed a few years ago. He was renowned for his work with celestial beings. I'll use another term which I quite like. And he was the one who introduced us to the word star being rather than alien or extraterrestrial, for the same reasons I've just explained. He has documented his story, which he's had many experiences with other civilizations in the cosmos, and some of them were very not pleasant. I'm not going to share his business here, but some of them were very threatening. And then he worked with people as a healer for those who'd been abducted into those different planetary beings. who would be, using the opportunity to get to know more about experimenting with earthlings, basically, to find out more about them. And I've had some clients who've had also the same experiences, but not so much negative experiences. And Credo claimed that a lot of his, and probably all of the people who came to him came for healing from those experiences. So that was his specific. He worked with people with AIDS, he worked with people who were sick, but mostly he worked with people who had these experiences that had disturbed. And so he would work with them. He had lots of beautiful paintings showing his experiences that he'd had. He knew a lot of the different races of civilizations and the names. And he referred to them by name. He had a lot of face-to-face contact with them.
Wow.
He wrote a few books about it too.
What's his name again?
Credo Matua, and you can find him easily enough. He was educated in university. He was actually very well educated and wrote quite a few books about different things, about healing. He was a fascinating fellow. And we didn't have very much time with him, but the time we had was so amazing. We had a few days there, and he taught us as much as he could in that amount of time. The thing that stands out for me was I'd had a picture that my mother had drawn for me to take to show him, because she'd had a visitation, she and Dad, quite a few years earlier than that. So I think it was probably in the early 1980s. Dad and Mum were coming home from a tennis party out in the bush, and a light came over the car, followed them all the way home, and they were aware that it was actually, Dad was a pilot, so he knew, this is coming from the sky. This is like not a plane. Let's go home as soon as we can. And they got home and ran inside and knelt at the dining room or the lounge room window looking out to the sky, and they saw it was a starship, much the same as your picture there. And it landed in the airstrip and created a big burn. You know how you read about these things. It landed in the airstrip, and there was a fence between the airstrip and the house, and Dad and Mum had quite a big garden. And Mum described these little beings coming out about 3/4 the size of humans, and they had longer heads, and Dad had like 6 cameras. In those days, Dad, he was a photographer, he had lots of cameras. He brought them all out and none of them would work. It was electrical blockage that happened. And so Mum drew a picture, which has been lost, unfortunately. But she remembered basically what they looked like when I was going to South Africa, and she drew that picture. But they sat and watched that starship for a couple of hours. Dad went to bed.
A couple of hours?
Mum stayed up. She didn't sleep. They were there for a couple of hours, and they got out and filled up a bottle with water out of the tap in the garden, because they were taking a sample back.
Okay.
Sample the water. And they saw them inside, walking around, the light inside the starship. Yeah, so they were there for a long time. But there's nothing Mum and Dad could do about it, and they didn't. In those days, I guess you wouldn't call anybody. I don't even know if they could use the phone. I think that was stopped as well. But they eventually went. And then the next morning, Mum was listening to the local radio. We used to do that in those days. She'd always have the local radio on to get the local news. And the man had called in on a bit like a podcast, and he also had a similar experience out in the bush, and that wasn't that far away, about an hour's drive away from Mum and Dad. So it must have been more than one starship that landed. And so he talked about that. And so Mum rang the radio station and said, could I have his number, or could you give him my number? And they ended up talking about it. And they both had very similar experiences. Dad also had a man working for him on a tractor. He was out in the middle of the night doing night work on the tractor. He saw it, and he pulled up in the tractor, and I don't even know if he turned the tractor off. He just got out and he ran and he hid under his bed for the rest of the night.
Fair enough.
Imagine, yeah, how frightening it would have been. But Mum was really open-minded, and so she didn't ever question it. And Dad didn't tell a soul. He just kept it to him. So Mum sort of told lots of people, including us. Dad never talked about it until he was up. And when these last few days, and I spent a lot of time with him, and he confirmed it, and had the same story to tell as Mum. But I showed Credo the photo and the drawing that my mother did, and he said she was lucky. They're friendly ones. He said they were a friendly race, and I don't remember the name, but
is that what you sort of described sounds similar to the small greys? This is a name that they're given. And
I've never got into all the names for I know you can buy books on it, like you can actually. And I have put that information away. It's one of those things that I've shelved. I haven't really needed to know the name, I guess, when I didn't keep it in my brain. But what I did keep in my brain was Credo said that they would be coming back, like we were going to have a visitation on a universal level at some point. He said the point was when the Earth came to crisis point, that there would be an intervention at some point where there'd be landings. And he gave 2 dates, which I'm not going to give you because it would just keep everybody on their toes too much. The dates that he gave were easy for me to remember because they were my parents' birthday, my father and my mother's birthdays. Yeah, so that
really,
that to me was just giving me a link to his story and my story. That's the link is Mum and Dad's birth dates. And so I can keep that easily, and that's all I need to know. And which year it's going to happen. He said he didn't know. He didn't give us a year. But I've been hanging up.
Did he know their dates of births though?
No, he just said, I'll give you
Wow.
He said, I don't know the year, but I'll give you the dates so you can confirm what I've told you one day. Yeah, and he was a seer and had very clear messages. And I do believe that will happen, and I do believe it's already happened. I think they've landed a few times and talked to some leaders about, the world, but we're not really ready yet still, I don't think, to receive them peacefully. And there are some who aren't terribly peaceful as well. So it's, quite a big deal when it does happen, and it's nothing to be frightened of. I think they've prepared so many people.
Yes.
And I've prepared many people. Like, I can't remember, I couldn't tell you how many people I've told my story to. And also when I do the healings, I ask their permission to talk to the cosmic family, which is different. So everybody has a starship watching over them, and that starship will watch over hundreds of people, and they'll keep an eye on there are some starships that are allocated for healing, but they're as real as our airplanes. I mean, they're not in the other dimension. They can disappear though, and they can hide, but they're there, and the beings don't come into the room with me, but I can see them with my third eye and my consciousness. And
what do they look like?
Oh, they all look different. Like there are different beings, but I've had one experience with some Pleiadian beings who, I believe it was Pleiades. I'm not absolutely certain, but yeah, that they're a smaller, but to me they're a finer kind of. This being was about a little bit like what I described earlier, about 3/4 the size of an average human adult. It was a female. She seemed to have breasts, and she just looked like a female. She's slim, and she didn't really have hair. She sort of had like a bodysuit on, shimmering light. And she gave me a healing one night. Through the night, I woke up in the middle of the healing, and then she smiled and nodded, and we kind of exchanged energy between us, and then I went back to sleep. Felt very safe with her. But I've had other experiences, but that was definitely a star being.
Just to interject, sorry, like the way you're explaining this is so casual, because I guess you've had a lifetime of this now. But do you recognize how incredible that must sound to most people, to me as well? I mean,
I do.
That's amazing.
I do think anybody who's going to tune into a cosmic banter will open-minded. It won't be unusual.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm speaking so freely, because I'm trusting that anyone who's watching this will be open-hearted and open-minded.
Of course. But I'm just saying it's a positive thing. It's just, it's amazing to hear that. You hear these stories. I mean, that here speaking to someone who's actually experienced this. This is not me reading a book or listening to another podcast. It was just more of a comment for me that it's amazing to hear. And do you mind if we backtrack I just have a couple of questions about your mother and father's sighting. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
So what decade was this?
I was in the 1980s, the early 90s.
Okay.
Yeah. I think
Was this in or?
left home and I was married, and it was my early, so it would have been about probably 1980, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
And was this in Moree or a similar area of Queensland?
At New South Wales, northern New South Wales in Australia, out in the bush. Yeah.
Could you give an indication of what was the nearest town, what part of New South Wales?
Yes, it was Moree, which is where I was born. Yeah.
Moree.
Yeah.
Okay. And so pretty rural.
Very rural. They were on a large property, a rural property. Yeah.
So they were coming back from a party and this light was following them home, like behind their car.
Yes, and it wasn't just them who had that experience. I also tapped into, I don't know how, I can't remember how, I met up with some girls from school who live in Moree, and they'd had several experiences. They had one experience very similar to mum and dad's.
Really?
A different time. And then that fellow who rang up, other people would have had that experience, but you didn't talk about it.
No.
Through me questioning and sharing the story that I got to know these girls had a similar experience. I'm sure and because people come to me, I'm a counsellor and a therapist, an energy healing practitioner. So I get a lot of people coming to me who've had all sorts of experiences that would shock people, but to me, they're not shocking because they're common. And you're right, it can be shocking for anyone who doesn't have that capacity to relate, or that people who would come to them and tell them stories. So I'm more that I've received so many stories from others. I haven't had personal experience other than the, visitation by that beautiful being that night. And also I can talk to them very easily. I talk to them every day, my star family. I just don't see them.
Right.
I can't hear them like your voice, but when I hear them speak to me, it's like a memory. So if I was to ask you, what did you have for breakfast? And you started thinking, but not to tell me out loud, but just think in your head, I had this and I had that. It's that kind of voice I hear. So it's just, I call them whispers. Whispers in your mind. And I turn them on, I turn them off. They're not there all the time. They're only there when I call them in. But they're there.
Yeah.
Whenever I need them, they'll show, they'll come to me.
And I want to expand on that in a moment too. The comment you made about your father not telling a soul until he was on his deathbed, that's a very, very common story. With all of these sort of experiences, I've listened to so many podcasts. I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of hours and documentaries and books and all that, and whether it's the person telling the story themselves who has had an encounter or a family member. I've had actually something in my own family, which I'm going to talk about in a separate episode, but it's a similar thing where these people, you'd be seen as crazy. Don't tell anyone. And then maybe the right time and the right person comes along. In your father's case, as he was dying, he was willing to share it then. And it just makes me wonder, and this is part of the motivation for doing this podcast, is how many, for every person that has had an experience and is willing to share it and publicly, shares it, how many others have had experiences that we don't know about because they have a fear of what people will think, and rightly so. So I'm noticing with the content I'm engaging with, the podcasts I'm listening to, and documentaries and all sorts, that particularly in an anonymous fashion, so not all of my guests will necessarily be on video if they're not comfortable, and we may use an alias for them. A lot of these shows I'm listening to and watching, they're people who know that their friends and family and colleagues would never listen to that podcast or see that show on YouTube. And so they're comfortable anonymously telling their story. They just need to get it out. But outside of that platform, they've never told anyone else. And so I just found it fascinating that that was your dad's response. And I think that's really common.
It says a lot about our world, doesn't it? That we have to suppress these experiences for fear of being ridiculed and shamed. And, we don't live on a very friendly planet, this one, unfortunately.
And so your father went to bed, wasn't having anything to do with it. The worker on the tractor scurried away in fear. Your mother watched them for a couple of hours. You said that she watched them take a water sample. Can you, from your memory of her sharing that story, can you recall any other details, such as roughly how large this saucer, this craft was, and whether they acknowledged her watching them?
She felt that they were aware that she was there, but that she didn't feel threatened, and they didn't come near her. They didn't come into the house or try to bother her. So she didn't show any fear, really, because she was, I wouldn't say curious. It's not always, curiosity is a natural thing. But Mum was very open to experiences that a lot of people probably wouldn't be. She over time, she opened up more and more. She's had a lot of synchronistic experience in her life. She had a great faith. And so she was quite comfortable. It wouldn't have been too much for her to comprehend that there would be other worlds out there. I was fortunate to not be suppressed with that kind of thinking. My father, Dad didn't ever ridicule that kind of thinking either. He just didn't have much to say about it. A lot of families, there's shame if you come up, if you say you've got a voice in your head and said something, you're given a diagnosis, a label and medication. So that quick, isn't it?
Yep.
So it's quite dangerous for some people in situations like that to tell stories like that, because you might be accused of having a psychotic episode, and then you're put into care somewhere along the line. That was the way it used to be. I don't way as much anymore. People are braver. They're talking out more. We have to be brave. I have to be brave and talk about it, and hopefully won't be given any difficult time over it. But, if we don't start talking about it and stop being so afraid of it, we're only going to attract what we're putting out there. And if you're attracting beings that are going to make you fearful, that's because you're thinking that way. But if you start to think that there are beautiful beings of light who are willing to help us because we're going through a crisis, have been for a long time, and that our resources are threatened, so they say. Who really knows? There's just so much illusion happening on our planet. We don't know what's truth and what's not. So, I just think if they're going to help us stop a nuclear war, if they're going to help us stop war, why not start to open up to the fact that they exist and they want to help? I've heard all sorts of stories about that. I'm not going to share everything I've heard, but it's to me, it's like it's time. We stop being so fearful. We stop questioning, being afraid of being shamed or questioned. I think that the more you open up to this, I do believe that the higher chance you have of having an experience. I'm calling in a physical experience. I don't even think about that because I don't need to. I have a beautiful open conversation happening already, and I can see in my third eye what, when I travel with my clients, I take them on journeys to meet in the starship with their family, and then they have conversations. The things that come out of that, they're not hugely Star Wars kind of stuff. Like it's just pretty simple. Often people come back and say, "Oh, well, they didn't look anything like me." They look very different, but sometimes they do look like you. Usually, it's very quiet, and it's just an encounter of a telepathic communication. And they're shown around the starship. Sometimes people are taken on a short journey, but it's because I've built up, I guess, trust between myself and celestial beings who are willing to do that. I've not had anybody who hasn't had an experience. I have had one student who didn't want to do it. She was too afraid of that, so I didn't push that. But I think it's just, it's up to people who are comfortable with these encounters to start to embrace them and share them so that there is less fear, not to be afraid very much. But at the same time, I have had some clients who've had really frightening experiences. So you have to be aware of that, be mindful of that. And it's like anything, like what you think about, you bring about. So just keep raising and elevating your consciousness and being with the highest beings of light is what I tend to do. Rather than just any old star being, I want someone who's of a highest vibration of light to work with me, to talk to me. And that's important.
Yeah. Without, because I appreciate that you, hold privacy for your clients as the, highest priority, I'm sure. But without, obviously, mentioning names or anything, can you share some examples of stories or experiences that some of your clients in the past have had? Are there any sort of really interesting ones that stand out that you'd like to share?
Rather than me doing that, I'd like to refer to a book that somebody wrote about this. I mean, you would have seen lots of podcasts where people talked about this as well. I mean, I don't like to reveal client stories at all, really. It's not, I've got a rule, and that keeps me nice and tight, and reliable. Unlike some people who write, I do know people, I have colleagues who will write their client stories in books and things without permission. I don't. So there was a book that I read that I was drawn to by a woman called Elizabeth Clara, with a K, and she was from South Africa. I think the name Beyond the Light, I think I wrote it down here. Beyond the Light Barrier was the name of the book. And I think it was, I didn't write, 1956 she wrote that. So, or she had that experience. I think the book was written then. And her son and daughter, I think, still carry on that story for her. And she told the story of meeting, having a lot of encounters in South Africa where she lived, and then eventually being taken on a starship. And she fell in love with one of the star beings who she traveled with often, and they had a child together. And the star being who she had a child with took the son back to the other civilization. It was one that's related to Venus, Venusian, I think they call it, civilization. It's a very sad story. And it's a very sad story because it has a sad ending. However, there's so much beauty in the story as well. And whether you believe it or not, it's not exactly like what I've heard from my clients, because there's not been a romantic encounter in any of my clients' examples. But it's so well described as in the sorts of things she had experienced and the reasons why they couldn't live together because of their physiological differences, not able to live on the other planet for very long. She ended up having heart failure because she had so many experiences on the other planet that it affected her. So it's a sad story, but it moves you. And the stories that I've heard have been not as personal as that by any means. But you'll find their stories in her story in the initial stages, because they also had, visitations. I'll give a very brief example.
Yes.
Consciousness is like a spell, more or less, is cast over. They have a lot more powers than we do. So memory was taken from them, so they couldn't remember. But my clients do remember. The spell didn't work with them. So that's where you don't remember, and then
yes.
Something's happened and you've been somewhere, but you don't just have snippets of information come through. But the ones I've talked to had very clear memories, and they weren't blocked. So it's nothing bad happened to them. There was just a lot of questioning and a lot of checking out scientifically how our bodies and things like that. That's pretty common, I think. Just finding out information. I think they've been watching us, or they're part of us. So many of us have probably come from some of those planets. If you believe in incarnation in your soul, being able to move in and out of consciousness and your spirit. I think some people are more aware of that than others. I think a lot of the young people being born now, probably including yourself, are more open to that notion that perhaps there have been other civilizations, and that there is a book, I brought it to show you, called Bringers of the Dawn, that my mother introduced me to this book, and it was given to her, not this exact book. She had another book by a man.
So it's Bringers of the Dawn, and read out the rest.
Barbara McKinnick, yeah. So
Teachings from the Pleiadians.
Yeah, she channeled from the Pleiadians. So Mum was given this book when she was on an airplane, because after she had that experience, she was so, excited and open to finding out more. She sat next to a man. I can't remember his name. He had a great name. Anyway, she sat next to this amazing man, this African-American fellow, and he gifted her the book because she told him her story. And he said, yeah, I know all about it, but you need to read this book. And so she read this book. And in this book, they talk about how we are used by other celestial beings to experiment with consciousness, and like many different people from many different places, planets, coming together on here to try and work out some kind of cosmic mission. So like we're part of an experiment, more or less, or a part of a mission. I don't know whether that's true or not. I think it's possibly part of our population's involved in that, but maybe not all of it. I think there's a lot of missions happening on Earth besides that one. But we're definitely a place where you just know, there's so many different people from different places.
Yeah.
There has to be an original place they've come from. So, and there's been civilizations before this one that have been wiped out through war or through experimentation. I believe, I don't know if you believe, but there's anything that nature usually gets suppressed by leaders, and with good reason. They don't want to frighten people. They don't want to overwhelm people. Anything I'm telling you here today would not be news to anyone who gets to see the papers of leadership. You know what I'm talking about. They're suppressed. It's all suppressed.
Oh yes. Yeah, I'm quite interested in the, I suppose, UFO, they now call it UAP topic, which is not so much very spiritual. It's more nuts and bolts. We are, seeing these craft. What are they? And it appears that there's been both private companies and corporations like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, military contractors, who possess crafts that they're trying to back engineer. And these secret, what would you call them, programs have so many layers, are so deep that there's a class beyond top secret, and that, your normal congressman or congresswoman or president is not allowed to be read into. And so, yes, so I think there's a hell of a lot of compelling evidence over the decades that not necessarily our leaders, but this shadow government, or whatever you want to call it, not so much a shadow government, but there is a deeper state even beyond the president. And I'm sure someone like Biden or Trump, they know, but they probably don't know much more than you or I who are interested in the topic. They're not let in to, because I guess a president is only ever guaranteed to be in a position of power for 4 years, 8 years at most. And so over the decades, what's that? A civilian coming in for 4 years. And why would you, in the grand scheme of things, why would you tell that person, any great detail if you didn't want this being let out?
Yeah, and we need to be mindful of that too, not to say anything too much that would stir that pot. But, I think there's good reason for this kind of information to have been suppressed, because there are people there that go into fear. And I even feel responsible for that, talking about it, to be honest. So,
why would you feel responsible for that? You can't.
Because I'm talking openly about things that have been suppressed deliberately. And
yes.
And, you put yourself out there. Anybody who talks about this puts themselves on the line. But I really think that what we have to start to do is to be brave, and also to have a deeper confidence in the goodness that is prevailing across the planet. And to know that there is a lot of phenomena that none of us will be exposed to, that people experience. And, you mentioned earlier how people need to be anonymous to talk about these things. And as I said, that to me is a sign of the kind of world we live in.
Yeah.
We have to be secret about things, that we are getting censored if we speak out about anything. So yes, we do need to be mindful when we invite people into these spaces where we're talking about things that aren't necessarily considered to be safe to talk about. However, not to be afraid, like not to bring fear into the mix. The idea is to, as I said, I'll say it again, what you think about, you bring about. So let's tune in to the goodness and how these civilizations, oh God, they live so far away, but the magnificence of their crafts, that they can travel between worlds, that they can use free energy. And the reason I recommend that book, the planet that this lady met this fellow from when she went back there, the extraordinary experience that she had with the people, And we have this same kind of people here on Earth, like the Hopi Indians, for instance, the Native American tribe of Hopi peoples. Careful what I have, politically incorrect if I use the wrong, apologise. But
that's all right.
Becoming more common to say that, the word Indian now, but it wasn't for a long time.
I thought it was the other way around, that Native American.
Yeah.
I've heard even Native Americans refer to themselves as American Indians. So yeah, but anyway, that's.
Yeah, it is more so these days. But then, this is what happens. You get.
Yeah.
You get kind of like, what's the word? But you've programmed to think, to say something at a certain generation, and then 2 generations later, it's no longer able to be used. So forgive me for anything I shouldn't.
That's fine.
Hopi peoples are known to be very peaceful and loving and open and free with their, they share their spirituality, and as same with some other places in the world. have a very peaceful background. Nepal, for instance, there's a really beautiful, peaceful world. And so we have to remember those people. And it's the same there in the cosmos. There's some beautiful, peaceful civilizations out there that we can attract to us, and they will come if we ask them to. There are apparently certain kind of cosmic laws around them interfering with what we're doing. But if we invite them in, and this is what my beings have taught me, that they will help people who come and lie on the table and let me help them if I get their permission. But they will not help if I just do it. There's no can help, because they say, we need to open up and be aware that there are helpers out there and invite them in, that they're like the angelic realm who aren't allowed to interfere unless you invite them in. So that's the key. It's really important when you invite anyone into your inner world, or from another world into this world that, that's usually you can't see, to be very careful about who you invite in. Only those beings of the highest vibration are allowed to walk with me. Anyone I know how to move them through the time and space back home to their ancestors, but they're not allowed to whisper in my ear. They're not allowed to guide. They're not allowed to work with my people who come to me. And so it's just a matter of focusing on peaceful, loving beings and allowing them to come into your heart space and into your world. And anybody else can go home, back to the light, to be cleansed.
Yeah, almost like a spiritual boundary of sorts.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yes.
So don't start interfering too much is what I'm saying, and because you have to, if you're going to have a relationship with anybody from another world, put your boundaries up first, have your strong boundaries and know who you are, have a mentor, have a guide who can help you if you do get into any strife, as in like confusion or you don't feel well. It's just good to know these things from people who've had experiences. And reading, it can be that. You don't have to know someone personally. You just pick up a book, start listening. Daniel Scranton is a man who is quite well known, very well known. He has millions of followers on Facebook. He channels from the Algerians, I think it is. And he Daniel Scranton is his name. And I've met Daniel. He actually married one of my beautiful students, which was great. So
really?
I ran a workshop with him quite a few years ago now. And there's an astrologist called Pam Gregory, who is very well known. She has a podcast as well, and she talks to people about these things. There's, other people come to mind, but there's so many people, as you know, you've been watching, do that. Now, look at the spiritual podcasts and listen to what's out there so that you can build your knowledge and raise your vibration to that level where you're mixing with those of a high vibration. I think it's really important not to get too caught up in, energy that you can't manage, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I would say, whilst I do definitely have people in my life who are connected on a spiritual level, that sounds funny because we all are inherently, but you know what I mean, more consciously connected. But for the most part, my friends and my colleagues and the people I interact with are pretty straight up and down, and so the thing that whilst I've always been interested in this sort of realm, this phenomenon, the spirit realm, aliens, all of that, star beings, sorry, I sort of, similar to you, not so much, I didn't have any sort of psychic awareness as a child, but I was so curious about this magical realm of, Mum, what if do fairies exist? Do they really exist? Dad, what about, so you're telling me about the stars, so what are the chances of there being life out there? And I heard about Area 51 and what's that? And then you're sort of towards the end of high school, probably in my 20s when I sort of settled into the corporate world. Probably still privately had an interest, but it was overwhelmed by just, go to work, you party on the weekend, you pay your bills, you do some travel, you have a laugh, and it was nothing negative, but there's no one really that is willing to entertain that sort of topic. And so you sort of lose it a bit. And I've, in the last year or two, or couple of years, been regaining this interest. And it's what I find compelling is the first-hand experiences. And you sort of, because this past decade I've been sort of very using my rational mind, that listening to people's first-hand experiences on podcasts, like in this type of platform, was really compelling to me, because my rational mind thought, well, I've said this before, that not all of them can be lying, not all of them can be in psychosis, not all of it can just be explained away. And you mentioned, this lady in this book who'd had a sort of romantic relationship with the star being and had a child. I've heard similar stories on podcasts firsthand from people. Granted, I don't know who they are, can't verify the story, but I can, I back myself to be a good judge of character. And at first I thought, this is a little ridiculous, because, granted, you have these podcasts, you're probably going to get some people who are lying or are imagining or are embellishing because they want attention. And so I sort of thought that at first, and then I've heard a number of those stories, and one story I heard this lady describing her child, who she was taken back to sea on a starship, and she had a repressed memory she had forgotten, and it was this overwhelming. She got to see her child. And she was crying as she's telling the story. And to me, that was like, if you're lying, or if you're in some sort of psychosis or whatever, like, you're not going to act like that when you're telling the story. It was disturbing for her, And so rational mind was like, well, that's pretty compelling. And then, here's another one and another one. And then you listen to enough, and it gets to the point where you'd have to question why people wouldn't believe that there is something else if you've given enough time and given listening to enough stories. So that's sort of what I'm interested in hearing and doing this podcast. I really appreciate your time, and I know that you might have to jolt soon, but I just sort of had a final question. So obviously you mentioned you don't have these physical experiences, but you do sort of have this telepathic, if that's the right word, communication, and can draw them in and help. They help with healing with your clients. So without discussing, private experiences involving your clients, I appreciate that. Can you share any interesting messages that they have given you that have then been verified here in this physical realm? Like, they've told you something and then there's been some synchronicity, or it has come true? I'll put you on the spot there.
I wasn't ready for that one. No, I haven't.
Well, what are the types of messages though that they give you?
They don't actually tell me about what's going to happen. That okay. Tell me about what could possibly happen. I don't believe they know. I believe co-creators, but what they're observing is there's they too can see there's a block happening in the psyche of most people. It's like an energetic block. They're not able to get through to everybody, like Our brains generally will block anything. You've heard the story of when the explorers come to a place they've never seen a ship, they don't know what a ship is, and they actually block it from their memory. They don't actually see the ship because they've never seen a ship before. So they don't actually notice it's there. So I think what they say to me is that for me to come to an awareness that there is like a block put into the human psyche that's going to stop people from being able to see these things, and it's not necessarily a block that the person's put in there themselves. I'm not going to say too much about this. I'm just trying to explain it to you and so you'd understand. And one of my jobs is to help remove that filter or to open that up. And you're doing it. That's your job too, by talking about things like this to people, not necessarily people who are not going to believe you or going to ridicule you or walk away from you, but to those people who have a filter that is more inclusive of this kind of thing. Because the more your brain allows it to come in, the more you will see and hear about these sorts of things. So there's a part in our brain called the reticular activator system at the back of your brain, and it's programmed as part of the brain that if you decide you want to buy a white Jeep, then you can guarantee you're going to see 10 white Jeeps a day driving. So whatever you decide you're going to think about, it'll come about. And that's the key, is for people to start to, they may not believe this, but every time a part of them might believe it, and then they'll attract it to them. They'll find that this kind of thing will show up more on social media. There'll be eavesdropping conversations about things. The minute you start opening up a channel to something or a portal of consciousness, your brain, your neural pathways start to search for those things. So we just need to find new ways. You may have heard of the term new way walking, new earth dreaming. Well, we have to actually dream before we can walk that dream. And so why not open up to the possibility that there are really beautiful civilizations beyond this one who are peace-loving civilizations, who have found free energy, who don't pollute the atmosphere, who can use technology without harming anyone or anything or any creature. Why not start believing in that? And that can become a reality for us all. So that's the sort of thing they whisper to me, just to help people understand that they're there to help. And they say, be careful who you ask. Don't ask for too much information. They say that to me for a long time.
Really?
They help me, but they don't say, don't try and find the business behind this. We're taking care of that. It's too big for the human psyche. No, it's a big thing happening in the celestial realms. And so I don't try and find out too much about it all, because I know to have good boundaries, because I don't want to open those portals to those energies to come to me, to block me. I'm just focusing on the celestial beings of light and love and peace. And like you've got behind you, that's my realm, that's the one I'm tuning into. Look at how beautiful the picture is. It's like the elementals and the owl and the pink clouds. Why not dream that for our planet too? Why not have this kind of dream that we're going to be working with celestial beings in the future to really heal each other and heal the planet and become more interactive in cosmic relations, so that we're not alien to everybody else out there who are already talking to each other, that we become part of the new world, and that we wake up to how beautiful we can be as a race of people,
Yeah, that's beautiful. Leave me with that. That's beautiful. I have a million other questions, but I respect that you don't have all the time in the world and you're a busy lady. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time here. That was really fascinating. And and we'll keep in touch. I'll let you know when this is sort of being released and stuff. And please do pass on my email, my details to anyone else that who've had specific encounters and are willing to share their story.
Well, I can also, I have a partner who's had a lot of experiences too, and I'll put a little He's written some books about corn circles. He calls them corn circles. His name is crop circles. So, he has information on Rainbow Warrior Bookstore. I think it's called Rainbow. Be careful, Warrior. Yeah, the Rainbow Warrior Bookstore. He's written 14 books on shamanism, and it includes. It's not all about shamanism, cosmic experiences, celestial experiences. He does talk about the crop circles. So his name is Cornelius Van Dorp. And I think, as I said before, look for those books that are going to bring you information, but also a deeper message. I've mentioned a few people in a few places. Hopefully that's helped.
Yeah.
But
yes.
I'll look out for other people for you. That's where that came from.
Perfect.
Interested in sharing in different ways.
Perfect.
Thank you for finding me in Mullaney and for following through with your call, for putting this beautiful podcast out, and hopefully many people will see it, and hopefully they will support you with some positive comments. And don't be worried if they don't, but I think people forget sometimes to let people know how much they appreciate. And I think
Thank you.
One of the keys, isn't it, is to give back with respect, through gratitude, through just being mindful of how much of a risk people take. And I think that you put a lot of your energy and time into this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That resonates with me. And I think that's a nice note to end on.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, thank you to those listening as well. Anybody out there who's tuned in today to me. I really do respect your time that you've taken to listen. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Heather. You have a lovely day.
All the best. Thanks, Steve. Bye.
Well, wasn't that a fascinating yarn? If there's anyone else from Moree, New South Wales who can corroborate that UFO landing incident, please mention your encounter in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to Heather as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell button to be alerted when new episodes drop. And if you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to rate us 5 stars. Now, as you can imagine, being a budding content creator, it takes a while to meet the criteria for ad revenue sharing and to build enough clout for brand sponsorships. While I genuinely do this podcast from a place of passion, there is a lot of unpaid work that goes on behind the scenes. So a super easy, no obligation way to support the podcast's growth is by donating through the link that I've provided in the show notes. I've partnered with Now Payments, which lets you anonymously donate in over 300 different cryptocurrencies. I have applied for credit card and Apple Pay functionality, but for now, cryptocurrencies are the sole option, and honestly, they're cheaper and quicker anyway. If you're new to crypto, don't be too daunted. It's honestly much easier than you think, I promise. When you click on the donation link, Now Payments will prompt you to choose an amount to donate and select the cryptocurrency that you wish to use. Bitcoin is probably the most familiar to most of you, but other blockchains like Solana are quicker and cheaper. Honestly, it doesn't matter though. Whichever of the 300 you choose from, you've got a wide range of options. Now Payments will then generate a wallet address for you, which is in crypto land essentially the same as a bank account number. If you don't already hold crypto, don't worry. In New Zealand, easycrypto.com lets you bank transfer New Zealand dollars directly to their bank account, and they will automatically send the cryptocurrency of your choosing to my wallet address. Nice and easy. For my international listeners, Coinbase is widely trusted and super easy for first-time users. If Coinbase isn't available in your country, then Binance, which is the world's largest crypto exchange, is a fantastic alternative. Your support will help with upgrading audio and video equipment and covering essential software subscriptions. that'll allow this podcast to grow. God knows I need it. Thanks for listening tonight. Until next time, stay curious. And when the phenomenon decides to reach you, I hope that you decide to reach out to Cosmic Banter. Good night.